Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us here for Social Value Aotearoa's Social Value Matters New Zealand Talks Impact. Really appreciate that you've taken the time to join us this morning. I've got a panel of great guests that I'll introduce you to shortly. I just want to set the scene a wee bit, explain to you what Social Value Aotearoa is, and then talk about what's actually happening in our global community. So Social Value Aotearoa, we're the New Zealand joint member network of the Social Value International Community, which is the organisation that's really trying to change the way that society accounts for value. We're part of the movement. We're a membership organisation, so we represent a range of corporates, charities, consultants and individuals working in the impact space. So we're always welcoming new members. So if you like what you hear today, we're more than welcome, happy to have you in our network. Big week globally. We're part of Social Value International is hosting the Social Value Matters Conference, which kicks off tomorrow our time. We really want to make this a special event to show that we're part of the global conversation. You'll notice maybe in the background there, or actually you might on the screen, that we've got a visual illustrator with us. So Megan Sololi, welcome. She'll be actually taking some imagery and working her magic as we progress through the session. And I think that we'll have some instructions in the chat channel on how you can actually really sort of switch between the speakers and seeing what the illustrator is doing. So yeah, enjoy that. That will be cool. We're really looking forward to that. So we're kicking off the session here with a welcome message from Social Value Canada, who's hosting the Social Value Matters Conference. So we're going to hand over to a message from the chair, Stephanie Robertson.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Robertson and I'm the co-chair of Social Value Matters 2020.
Not? Okay. Well, just like anything on the, we've got to come back to a glitch or two, but we'll come back to it. Oh, are we coming? Want us to carry on? Okay, look, we'll carry on. We can play Stephanie's message a wee bit later. But as I said, we're kicking off. We're the first one in our time zone to kick off. So yeah, I'm really excited to actually be that, and we can play Stephanie's message to you when it comes to hand. But sitting next to me, we've got one of the keynote speakers to tomorrow's conference, Ōrākei. Morena, lovely for you to join us. Well, I'm going to get you to pick up your microphone there.
Right.
Just
okay, microphone.
So,
koutou.
Lovely to have you here. So Ōrākei, you and I last year, we went to Taiwan for the Social Value International Conference. Before I just get you to introduce yourself and your organisation, I'll get you to start there, and then maybe to think about why it's important that we're part of this global conversation.
Kia ora, kia kōkiritia I roto I te kōtahitanga mauri ora kia tātou, nā mihi manahau, nā mihi matatau kia koutou. Ki te taha o tōku pāpā no Ngāti Whātua rangitāne, ki te taha o tōku māma no Ngāti Parau rongo whakāta, kaitahu, mauri ora kia tātou. Morena, it's welcome, it's great to be here actually. And to explain a little bit about why I'm here, we are part of, the Whānau Ora Commissioning Agency is actually part of a global network called Social Value International, where we're all across the world coming together to look at how we share the story of change that impacts most on the communities that we work with, and how do we tell the stories and evidence the change that matters most with those communities that we work with. And that's probably the context for today's session this morning. But yes, we were in Taiwan this time, or just about this time last year, and the Whānau Ora Commissioning Agency last year was sharing with other countries our model, our approach to measuring outcomes, and measuring outcomes that do matter most for our families and our communities. And it was quite interesting to get the gauge of other countries and where they're at in measuring outcomes. But from that, we can say that the Indigenous model, the Māori model, was actually at the leading edge of looking at that and doing it in a way that measured what was really important to our communities, to our whānau.
Definitely. And I think some of the way that that New Zealand's sort of actually doing a grassroots approach, and actually sort of like even changing it to like movies to videos to inform and actually really build the connection of the story of change for the families that mate, is really important. So since you're speaking tomorrow and we're really lucky to have you here, we just thought that you might just want to do a little bit of a teaser. It may not be exactly what you're speaking tomorrow about, but really set the scene for your keynote tomorrow at the conference.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, okay, somebody's just telling me I've got 5 minutes left. Okay, just very quickly. What I did want to talk about is that the session that New Zealand is leading on in a keynote tomorrow, which I'm speaking on, is called Communities Flourish When Stakeholders Are Heard. But for New Zealand, that is not actually the right title. So the title I'm going to talk about is why globally that might seem important. For New Zealand and for Māori, communities flourish when our whānau, when our families are in the engine room, making that change happen for them. So it's a massive turn of viewpoint about how you look at doing change in your own communities. Not to them, not for them, but with them, and so they're leading that change for themselves. And that actually underpins the whole Whānau Ora model, which I know so many of you online this morning already know about. Whānau Ora is actually about working alongside our whānau so that we can help support them rebuild their own capacity, their own capability to take the change, to take the outcomes they want for their whānau to flourish, to be able to go from languishing to flourishing, but in a way that sees them control that journey for themselves. If whānau do not control that journey for themselves, when it is done to them, when a moment in time of one service or program is done to them, it is never owned by them. And we see that now because of the stark, diverse realities facing our people, and the gap is so wide between what they can achieve and others and their wellbeing outcomes. But it's not about being negative, it's about being positive. How can you turn that round? Whānau Ora is a model that has turned that round. It has turned that round by putting in a generational approach to seeking change. If you're really going to get enduring outcomes for whānau, what underpins that? First of all, there are whānau in crisis. The first step in their journey of change is about taking them so they avert crisis. Averting crisis consistently, but not leaving them there. Taking them on their journey of change so that their family becomes stable and stable over time. But being stable is not the end result. Being stable is the next part of the journey so that whānau are actually able to be resilient over time. Resilient so that they're able to become the leaders of their own families. And the last point on that, they are the leaders of their own families, so they then stand up and be the leaders in their communities and drive change from that community's point of view. 6 years later, after the commissioning agency has been in place, we are now starting to see whānau move through that whole trajectory. It's a generational trajectory. It's a model we called from languishing to flourishing, which sees Whānau Ora model support that whānau on the whole story of change for truly enduring outcomes. Kia ora.
Wow, thank you. I'm signing up. So we've got, so if you want to hear more about that on the actual international panel tomorrow, and I think it's 9:15 our time, you can register. It's not too late to get tickets to the conference. You can go to our Social Value Aotearoa website and it will send you the link to the conference there. And there's some really great speakers. And we're really lucky to have Ōrākei speaking for the New Zealand voice there on that panel. So
I'm going to say one thing.
Yeah,
one thing for tomorrow. Tomorrow's speech is going to be different. But tomorrow's speech, do you know what it's about? Because it's in the context of COVID as well. So I'll be talking about the Whānau Ora model. But I tell you what, Whānau Ora has always had, and it stood the test of time during COVID, it stood the test of time before COVID, and it stands the test of time now. The virus is health inequity. The virus is that we're in a terrible state with our health and well-being. The vaccine, the injection, is Whānau Ora. Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you very much. So we've got a little gift for you for taking your time out of your busy day today. And so thank you, really appreciate for you giving a wee insight for our conference tomorrow.
Thank you,
for joining
and
us.
enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank
Kia
you.
ora.
Kia ora. Awesome. Okay. Oh, look at the visual illustrator going there. That's awesome. You want to have a wee chat with that. Now Carrying on the lens of wellbeing for impact, I've got four great panelists that's going to come up and actually share their thoughts on that. So can I invite the panelists to come to the table, please? All right. Are we all in camera? Matt, did you get into camera? Oh, we did. Awesome. Thank you for joining me today. So we're just going to have a conversation today around wellbeing as a lens for impact. I'm just going to let the panelists introduce themselves to really just actually say a wee bit about themselves, what organisation they are and what they do within that organisation. So we've got a mic there, so we'll start this way with you, Brad, and kia ora.
Kia ora, Joe. Kia ora, everyone. Morena, thanks for having us. Yeah, I'm Brad Norman. I work for the Whānau Ora Commissioning Agency, same organisation that Awarangi just talked about. And I'm just going to talk briefly about our team. So our team is the Data Systems, Analytics and Performance team. And so what we do is we work alongside our partners across the North Island to ensure that they can measure and report on the impact that they're creating with families and communities across the North Island of New Zealand. Kia ora, excited to be here.
Tēnā rā tātou katoa, ko te tuatahi mihia ahau ki a koutou e mātakitaki mai ana, nō reira tēnā rā tātou katoa. Huri noa ki ngā kai kōrero o te ata nei, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Ko ai ahau, i te taha o tōku māmahiurio no Ngāti Whātua, i te taha o tōku pāpahiurio no Hingapore, no Singapore. Nō reira, tēnā rā tātou katoa, ko Shazaya Salem tōku ingoa. And I am one of the kaimahi at Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei. Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei is one of Whaimaia, is one of the subsidiaries of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei. And my role is the projects manager for the collective impact space. I'm very, very newly appointed, 3 weeks actually into this space. And I'm sitting in the seat of Rangi Māori e Hunia. And I'll be talking to the wellbeing of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei. So tēnā rā tātou katoa.
Kia ora, I'm Clemmy Baker. I'm the Director of Impact Consulting at the Ākina Foundation. I work with organisations, corporates, charities, government agencies, all sorts, helping them to identify what positive change they're trying to create, what outcomes they're trying to create, and designing strategies to increase that impact and measuring whether it's happening or not.
Tēnā koutou katoa, no tamaki makaurau, aho, ko rangi toto, te moanga, ko Waitemata, te moana, ko Matt Trent, toku ingoa. Hi everyone, I'm Matt Trent from Fonterra. My role is Manager Social Responsibility. And the way I see my role in the organisation is looking at how do we care for people right through our value chain. So I've got a kind of a global view of our sustainability commitments and the social responsibility commitments around people.
Awesome. So we've got quite a views from different sectors here today. So it's going to be really exciting to just really look about how we create impact for wellbeing outcomes. And so we've got different lenses for the different sectors. So I'm really excited to actually just have this chat and see how we're all sitting in this space. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, we'll go through one question at a time and I'll get you just to sort of answer from your lens and just what you're comfortable with. And let's say we all know that impact and everybody's impact journey is a journey. So it doesn't matter where we're sitting on that spectrum. We're just really interested to hear through our lens, through each of others' lens about wellbeing. Okay, so my first question is for all of you, what does wellbeing mean for you? So who would like to go first? Shall we start down the other end with Matt maybe this time, yeah? We'll come back this way.
Sure, thanks Joe. And what does wellbeing mean for me? Let me give you a kind of a business lens or a workplace lens. I think, you know, wellbeing from a workplace perspective is how do we care for people as they come into the business and look after their well-being and recognise that people are whole people. I think there used to be a expectation in business that you came to work or you logged onto your computer or you went to the factory and you left all your other stuff at home. You left the stuff that you're dealing with at home. And I think business is getting the understanding that actually that doesn't make sense. You know, it actually makes sense to care for people as a whole. And we've seen that kind of through COVID, right? Where, you know, things have changed significantly for our people. You know, people are concerned at the global socioeconomic events that are kind of happening. You know, living and working conditions have changed somewhat. Social and community networks have changed. Individual kind of lifestyle factors have changed. And all of those things take up mental space. To process that, whether you know it or not, kind of takes up mental space. So from a business perspective, there's an opportunity to go, actually, how do we better support our people? And how do we better support the well-being of our people? And I think from a New Zealand perspective, over time, we've got quite good at looking after the physical health and the physical well-being of our people. There's an opportunity for us to consider how we look after the psychological well-being or the psychosocial well-being of our people, and consider people as a whole. And so I think, you know, I'd encourage the businesses that are listening today to think about, what does well-being look like for your people, and how do we best care for that? Outside of whether we're going through a pandemic or not, but what does it look like to actually look after the whole person? Because if we have the opportunity to look after the whole person, it just makes good business sense, right? You know, if people feel safe, if people feel cared for, if people feel that they're making a contribution, there's an opportunity for them to actually perform better in business. So one, it's the right thing to do, but there's actually benefits that we get out of it as well. So, you know, wouldn't it be fabulous if New Zealand business as a whole had the heart that when people walk into our business, we want them to walk out feeling better about themselves rather than feeling depleted at the end of the day. You know, and that to me is well-being from a business context.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Clemmy.
Thanks, Joe. So at the Ākina Foundation, we think of well-being as being the consequence of what happens when you achieve positive impact for people and the environment. So we define impact as the positive social, environmental, cultural, and economic changes that happen because of what you do, kind of your outcomes, from the perspective of the people who are experiencing the change. So I think that bit's really important. It's getting clear on well-being being about what the people experiencing the change want to see as well-being. But as an organisation who works with other organisations who are doing fantastic things, well-being for us is a really important goal to identify what it is. And it's about that crossover point between what the community values and the goals of the community, what they want to see happen, and what our client values and wants to see happen and is able to do something about. So it's kind of what's that convergence point where an organisation is able to work with the community and achieve that community's goals.
Thanks, Clemmy.
Ka pai. Yeah, well-being from a Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei perspective is a holistic. We take a holistic perspective on this, and so what does that sort of mean for Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei? When we're talking about the holistic well-being of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, of a hapu member of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, we're talking about the cultural strand, we're talking about the environmental strand, we talk about the economic strand, and we also talk about the health strand. And when we talk about health, we're talking about the spiritual health, the physical health, and the mental health. And all of these strands contribute to that holistic well-being of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei. And what I can liken well-being to a rope, and when these strands are all bound tightly and working coherently with each other, we can immediately identify that this rope is durable, it's capable, and it's really ready to do anything that it's set up, that it needs to do. When we think of one of these strands not working coherently with the rest, or multiple of these strands not working coherently with the rest, we can immediately understand that this rope will start going wonky and its capability will be less. I would liken well-being, the holistic well-being, to mana motu hake. And we have a saying, and it's toi tū te whenua, toi tū te tangata. And what this talks about is the flourishing environment equals a flourishing peoples. And that takes it back to that coherent those strands working in coherence with each other. But at the end of all of that, sort of what the most important piece here is the cultural strand, because we believe that if there is a solid tuapapa, if there is a solid foundation, cultural foundation, that the rest of those strands will flourish, will just flourish naturally and will grow naturally, because we have the right mechanisms in place to sort of grow that. And that brings it back to that whakatauki, toitū te whenua, toitū te tangata, because there is no way that we can manaki the whenua without those cultural foundations embedded. So yeah, that's sort of what mana motuhake, what wellbeing looks like to Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei.
Thanks, Gio. Brad.
Kia ora. Oh, tough going last after that, kōrero. Particularly after Awarangi's opening remarks. No, so yeah, just want to tautoko my fellow panelists. Just to add, I think for me, wellbeing is around, it's taking that holistic view of wellbeing, but it's also about understanding what matters most to whānau. And that's around understanding their needs, their aspirations, and how we're working with them to progress them forward, and how are we transforming their lives. So Awarangi spoke to that languishing to flourishing transformation sort of scale, from being in crisis to stability to creating resilience and leadership. So wellbeing is all of that. Joe mentioned it earlier, it's a journey, it's a state, but it's also a journey at the same time. So how are we working with whānau to build their capacity and capability to move forward? How are we helping determine a journey for them to achieve what they want to achieve? So it's about what matters most to whānau, and it's definitely not what is the matter with them approach. It's what matters most to them. So kia ora.
Kia ora. Wow, that's a great start. Okay, and I suppose out in the audience there too, you might be actually reflecting on what wellbeing means to you as well. So it's a great start. Okay, now I've got a second question here. So Clemmy, just to give you a heads up, I think we'll start with you. So we're going to look here around, okay, so maybe can you tell us a wee bit about the work that you were doing to achieve the wellbeing outcomes, some examples of maybe how you're supporting the wellbeing in the community you work with?
Great, thank you, Jo. So the Ākina Foundation believe that business has huge potential to achieve positive impact. So we think that, especially at the moment, now more than ever, we've needed strong businesses that are focused on well-being to support our economic recovery, to support really strong outcomes in our communities as we recover from COVID and see us through this next recession. So what we think we need is businesses that start well, run well, buy well and invest well. And I'll just touch on all of those four things. So when I say start well, we think there's a massive opportunity for community organisations, whānau and charities to start businesses that can build the financial resiliency of that organisation or that group. They could have a more diversified funding model. They're not solely reliant on grant funding, but grant funding can play a really great role in kicking them off and getting them started. They can then run businesses that are designed to achieve positive outcomes and are sometimes uniquely placed to achieve those outcomes. They might be looking to generate positive employment outcomes that they can only do because they're trading. You know, they're actually running a business, and so they can employ people. So that's the starting well, and an example of that is a really cool thing we've been doing recently with the Manukau Urban Māori Authority, who we were working in partnership with, and a bunch of government agencies to run a pilot scheme for a car leasing model, so that people have alternative options to access a car at a rate that's affordable, but they also can choose to get into a hybrid car so that they're able to achieve the environmental goals they might want to be achieving as a family. So that's the starting well. On the running well, we think that all businesses should be more focused on the positive impact they could be having, which includes understanding what impact they're having, measuring that impact, and managing the impact. They can then report on it better, which helps those businesses to get stakeholders that are aligned with those outcome goals. Investing well, we're excited that just this week we've learnt that the New Zealand impact investing market has grown 13 times in the last year. So there's huge potential there for businesses that are doing good to get investment and grow and do more good with that impact investment. And finally, the buy well. We're working with really interesting organisations like my colleague to the left here, who are looking to buy from organisations who are doing good. And so that helps build the social enterprise or the diverse business that's achieving positive outcomes, and they can support that bigger business to get a contract with government, for example, to deliver government goods and services, infrastructure projects, where our government in New Zealand happily has committed to broader outcomes in their procurement rules. So in some contracts, they're saying, look, a big chunk of our decision on whether we grant this contract is going to be whether we're achieving these broader outcomes or not. So there's really exciting opportunity there for businesses who are doing good to win contracts based on the doing good bit.
Thanks, Clemmy. Sounds really exciting. And my head's sticking around some of those areas around procurement and that I can see some alignment to some of the projects we're working on. I'm going to pass across to you. Would you like to share the same question? So a bit about the work that you're doing to achieve wellbeing outcomes, and maybe some examples about how you're supporting wellbeing in your communities.
For sure. So Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei's sole purpose is to advance the cultural, environmental, economic and health interests and aspirations of our whānau. And it sounds like a lot like, how can you do this all in one space? So one of the pieces I can probably talk to that's happened most recently is the Covert Response. Now, COVID made us turn on like a light, like extremely quickly. We knew that at Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei we needed to respond quickly to ensure the health of our whānau was maintained, and that too we were building resilience within our whānau. And how did we do this? We needed to ensure that our kaumātua were in a space that was safe, that there were no germs coming in, most importantly. So what we did was we distributed over 1,200 ready-made meals to our kaumātua throughout that lockdown period. Yeah, and then we needed to ensure that the education journeys of our rangatahi, of our tamariki, continued during this time. Because there was no ready access to, there was no access to getting into school, obviously, and we needed to ensure that their learning journeys were continued. So what we did was distributed over 400 Chromebooks into homes so that they could still be ready participants of education to continue their education journey. We offered flu jabs, we offered COVID testing up at our clinic, and there was a plethora of other stuff that we sort of did in that 6 week period to ensure the health of our whānau was maintained. One of the other programs or initiatives that Ngāti Whātua is doing and focusing on is increasing the reo capability within our whānau. Now, earlier I spoke to the point that building a very strong tuāpapa and culture allows for an easy growth of those other strands. So we've put a really big emphasis and a really audacious goal of ensuring that at least 90% of our hapu, that is 5,500 members of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, are able to speak reo at varying levels, but still able to speak reo and making touch with this cultural strand. Because what this does is open doors to whakapapa, it opens doors to that genealogy, it opens doors to the histories, and then they can be better grounded in who they are as people to then grow themselves. So that's sort of a little bit about what Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei is doing in that space.
Thank you, that's awesome. Kia ora. Please, Brad, I'll give you the same question. Over to you.
Ka pai. Yeah, so I guess for me, it's the principle that underpins what we do in the commissioning agency is that acknowledgement that families and communities are the solution. And it's around commissioning investment to partners that are best placed to work alongside those families and communities to achieve those aspirations. And so it's about giving them the resources and devolving decision-making to our partners and our communities and our families to drive themselves forward. So it's building their mana well, not building their mana, acknowledging their mana and building their capacity and capability to work forward. To do that, they need to have the resources. And so that's what our approach is at the commissioning agency. It's understanding from the community what their needs and aspirations are and investing in that. Yes, there's a whole measurement framework that sits alongside that so that we know and understand the impact that's been created through this investment. But it's up to families and communities to determine what they need and want and come up with the program solutions to deliver that.
Great, thanks, Brad. I think we'll just pass it down there. Last but not least, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, team. And you know, maybe if I can talk from two perspectives, from an employee's perspective, and then what business can do in the community perspective. And you know, we're in a little bit of a unique position. Perhaps we're a farmer-owned cooperative, so we're owned by 10,000 farming families around New Zealand. We employ probably 20,000 people globally, which is about 12,000 in New Zealand. And so looking after their well-being in the context of the community that they operate in is really important to us. So, you know, from a well-being perspective, some of the things that we're doing for our people is looking at, you know, what are the challenges within the communities that we operate in, and how do we support people when they come to work? Because, you know, people spend 8-10 hours a day at work. It's a big part of their day, and it's a big opportunity for us to consider kind of well-being while we're through that process. So, you know, we took a look at some of the OECD stats. New Zealand's got some of the worst instances of domestic violence in the OECD, right? So we had a look and went, how do we support our people if they're suffering from domestic violence at home? It's something that's out there in the community. If we can support our people, make them stronger, it strengthens the family unit. So we've put a whole support package in place for that, well ahead of the kind of government legislation that came in a year or so ago. We were probably 18 months ahead of that, going, how do we support people? We partnered with people like Shine and Women's Refuge to develop that, to support our people. And having heard some of the stories of some of our people that are in those kind of situations, and it doesn't discriminate, it's right through society, whether you're in a rural community somewhere or whether you work in our head office just down the road here. Being able to support our people through those kind of situations, that's a real tangible, how do we support their well-being? You know, the OECD stats, New Zealand's got some of the worst cases of schoolyard bullying in the OECD, right? So how do we address a bullying culture that people grow up with and make sure it doesn't come into the business and into the business realm, right? And so we've developed specific kind of anti-bullying and harassment training. We've had over 4,000 of our people to date go through that, just to give them the tools to deal with something that's kind of a little bit embedded and ingrained. You know, and then we've looked at things like, you know, we know that mental health, particularly in rural areas and in isolated rural areas where a lot of our farming families are, can be quite a challenge. You know, there's challenges when you're working the land and you're doing it a lot by yourself, and, you know, there's maybe increased regulation, or there's drought, or there's floods, etc. Right? So we've partnered to run what we call a good yarn program, and we've trained 1,500 tanker drivers to have mental health conversations, you know, and identify what are the challenges and identify the things that that our farming families might be feeling, and how do they actually how can they work through it, right? So they're not we haven't trained them as counsellors, we've just trained them to have a good first conversation. So I think from a business perspective, if you can understand the context that you're operating in, understand the challenges to well-being for your people within that context, and can put things in place to give them the tools to be better equipped to deal with that context, you can make a difference in those individual family units and then in the communities. From a community perspective, I think we've also got an obligation as businesses to consider how are we making a positive impact in the communities that we're operating in. And one of the things that we do as cooperative and collective is we run Kickstart breakfast programs, which is providing milk and wheat bix and a kind of a breakfast club. This is in partnership with Sanitarium and the Ministry of Social Development to kids that actually don't come to school and don't have breakfast. You know, and we know that we've done some, university has done some studies on our behalf. We know that kids get better learning outcomes when they've got a full tummy, you know. They actually learn better and they're less disruptive in class, you know. So it's looking at what's the felt need within the communities within which we operate. Who can we partner with? You know, who can, who's out there that's aligned to what we're doing, aligned to our values. And for us, something like a Kickstart breakfast is aligned to us as a nutrition company. So it's kind of part or in addition to core business. So where are those kind of synergies, and how can business and communities partner to get better outcomes for everybody?
Great. How are we going for that's there's so much that we can just unpack here that we can have this conversation forever, but we're actually on a time. How am I going? Oh, cool. Awesome. So I'm going to ask one more question because I'm just tuning around so many opportunities. I think one of the areas that we have in common here is really about listening to the communities, that the communities have the answers a lot, and actually building connections to actually really work together to allow the community to actually create a solution within itself. And you talked about there, Matt, around the challenges of finding people to partner with for those areas and opportunities. And I think just even having a shared understanding of what wellbeing is and understanding what everybody's trying to do, that working together allows us to actually help those communities to actually be the owners of their own solutions. So I'm going to sort of just throw a little question here about during the COVID. Shazia, you talked about what you saw Ngāti Whātua do during COVID. Maybe if you could just share with us one of the stories that you saw that was maybe that you were really proud of from your organisation, or that you saw in your communities that as a response for the wellbeing that happened that you saw during the COVID pandemic. So maybe who would we start with? Yeah, who would you like to start this time? Because you haven't started.
Yeah,
You're up.
I see the mic coming this way.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. One of the biggest things that became apparent over that COVID period was connection, because the restrictions required us to stay in our homes, to restrict the communication that we would usually have with whānau. Whānau started to get really nervous, so we needed to ensure that this connection was maintained. And I think this is more of one of the recent pieces. We have a lot of whānau that live in Melbourne. And as we all know, Melbourne's been in lockdown for a very, very long time. And unfortunately, they don't have, when they step out onto their whenua, they're not standing out in their whenua. They're not stepping out into Ōrākei. They're not in close proximity to their marae. So connection for them is extremely hard. What Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei has done is a simple thing, is picking up the phone multiple times throughout this lockdown in Melbourne and made contact with our whānau. And the response has been massive. The response has been varied for different people. But what we've noticed is that our mamas, our whaia, they have been the most affected, because what they're trying to do is keep the house running, ensure that the kids are fed, ensure that the washing's still done, ensure that they're still working. You know, they're trying to keep everything afloat. And just by a simple phone call, making that connection, they've shared their feelings with us, and there's immense gratitude from our whānau over in Melbourne for maintaining that connection. So no matter how far we are, they are able to connect. So that's one of the beautiful things that we found through COVID.
Awesome, cool.
Did you have other questions?
Yeah, no, you go for it.
So something that we've seen through COVID is what you're kind of touching on, Joe, like the language of impact, and we've seen more organisations talking to each other about their goals rather than what they're doing. So they're talking about what change they're wanting to see. I think that COVID's been a bit of a forcing mechanism for us to all get clear on, we want people to be healthy, we want people working, so we've got employment outcomes, health outcomes. It's helped switch that language a bit away from we run a school or we run a health service or whatever, and we've got more ability to use that common language of outcomes and well-being and impact to communicate better and form better partnerships.
Thanks, Clemmy.
Big challenge, COVID, right? You know, massive shift kind of overnight, and I think we've been really fortunate to be an essential service. So our business has been able to continue to operate where a lot of businesses haven't been able to, and you know, we are extremely grateful for that, and we see it as it's a real it's a real privilege to kind of continue to work, but it's also we feel kind of the weight of that as well, you know, to continue to be one of New Zealand's larger businesses that's continuing to put money into particularly rural economies. That's our kind of business model. Through COVID, so many changes and so many things that we've had to do. You know, we most of our people, so probably half of our people had to start working from home right around the globe. You know, which was a big challenge for us, big challenge for our infrastructure. Our staff that were in our factories, we had a number of vulnerable staff, so about 10% of the workforce in our factories were vulnerable staff, so they couldn't actually operate in the factories. We needed to wrap some extra care around them, and then some extra care around the people that were in the factories that were picking up the load as well. So a couple of things that we've done that I'm really proud of. We diverted some of our ethanol production, so we create ethanol out of one of our plants. Normally that goes to fuel. We actually diverted that into hand sanitizer because there was a shortage of ethanol in New Zealand to make hand sanitizer. So we diverted a whole pile of that to hand sanitizer through New Zealand. We've been able to kind of pivot our business so that when, for example, all the restaurants in China closed down and they didn't need to buy our food service products, we could divert that to other places around the world and keep that working through our supply chain. And for our people specifically, you know, we've developed a wellbeing model internally to have the conversations. And I think some of the important things through COVID is just to normalize that, you know, this is taking up mental space for everybody, and how do we do it? So we've run calls with our people, what we call good chats, and we've had over 3,000 people from around the world on these calls, and we're just sitting down having a kōrero for an hour, giving them some tools to understand the situation that they find themselves in, and then how to kind of respond to it as well. And it's amazing. You know, you hear these stories from right around the world and everyone is feeling something similar. And so if there's a silver lining to COVID, it's unusual for a global event to happen that affects people the same way, no matter where you are. And for us, this has really brought us together as a company, because we're all going through a similar kind of thing, regardless of whether you're in Mexico or Amsterdam or Shanghai or Kuala Lumpur or New Zealand or Australia. And so real opportunity to go, how do we get through this together? And how do we help people know that the company's got your back through the process?
Great, thanks. The pivot being an operative word there.
Over to me. Yeah, I actually just wanted to start off by giving a big mihi to our Whānau Ora providers, because what they did over COVID was just outstanding, and obviously Ngāti Whātua being one of them. And so stories like that were just resonated across the whole of our Whānau Ora partnerships. And so from when we first went into lockdown, the leadership just stood up. Our Whānau Ora practitioners just stood up. And the magic about Whānau Ora is the agility and responsiveness. And so all our resources were able to be redeployed to support whānau in this crisis. And so there was a whole lot of effort that went out to ensure that our whānau were resourced with hygiene and sanitation products. So all our partners became sort of logistics and warehouses and delivery sites for these hygiene and sanitation products. They were able to deliver kai to whānau in need. There was firewood delivered. There were devices so that our tamariki, our children, could connect to the schooling and education. There were winter clothing. There were winter packs given out. So there was a whole range of essential resources that were delivered to whānau in a short period of time to ensure that they were resourced over that period. And a lot of the feedback that we got from families across the North Island was that quite often our Whānau Ora practitioners were the only connection that they had over that time. So it was able to ensure they were keeping in contact with families in need as well. And that's just the magic of Whānau Ora, is that they're able to respond to whatever need in that community is and just support them to work alongside them. And they'll continue to do that as well. As Ōrākei mentioned earlier, they were there before, during, and they're going to be there after as well. So I just wanted to finish off with a big mihi to our provider network for that.
Awesome. Some great stuff happening there. I could keep on asking questions, but I know that there's an audience out there, and I know that they probably have questions from the discussion that's been going on today. So if you want to throw your question into the chat channel, we'll see if we get time to get the panelists to ask. Thank you, John Huaka. We've got a question here. John wants to know, what is the best way to hear from whānau in the community about what their aspirations are and how they wish to be supported? So anyone want to put their hand up to an answer?
I'll answer that. Kia ora, John, for your question. John actually works in one of my teams. So the best way is to listen to them and acknowledge that they've got the solution, and work with them to identify what their needs are and what their aspirations are. So it's also about trust as well. And so that's one of the key things that our Whānau Ora partners have across our communities, is that they're embedded within the community. They know the community, they've got the trust of the community as well. And so when you've got that trust, you can have those really robust conversations with whānau, really understand what they want, and it's about listening to them, not about coming in with okay, I think I've got something for you. It's actually, what would you like, and how can I work alongside you to achieve that?
Cool. Maybe Matt, maybe you want to have a take on that for your rural community, and you've talked about your tanker drives and that. How do you get the best gauge for your community?
Mostly it's through our farmers, and then through the sites that are operating in rural communities around New Zealand. And we were actually just having a conversation on this last week, and going, how do we get better at understanding what the needs are of the communities around us in a consistent and coherent fashion? And I don't know that we've got a full answer. We've got a team of people that are in the rural communities and that are engaging with our farmers through our farm source business. So they've got a sense of kind of the pulse and what's important to kind of some of these communities, and certainly in the areas that we operate. In some cases we're one of the larger employers in some of the smaller towns around New Zealand, and so there's a sense from the workforce of what they need, but I think we could get better ourselves at actually understanding how to engage. And as you said, the journey for us and the journey for businesses in general, I think from a social responsibility or sustainability perspective, is how do we move from doing something to a community to doing something with a community, and that's the thing. And I don't know that I've got all the answers yet, but I'm hopeful that we're starting to ask the right questions about how do we engage better with the communities to understand the felt needs and then act to respond.
Awesome. Clemmy, did you have anything to add around involving stakeholders and getting the stakeholders' voice?
Well, I'm a little bit obsessed with the theory of change model, and those who are watching, who are here because they are into valuing outcomes and looking at outcomes, hopefully familiar with that model, but basically it's a way of representing how change happens. And definitely whenever we do that process, we think it's vital to listen to people about what is changing for them or what they hope will change. So I guess my thing is quite a practical one of it's hard, it can be difficult to, if you're an organisation that's a bit removed from the community that you're hoping to work with, then we normally suggest trying to find organisations in that community who are better connected and have those relationships. and make sure you're finding the right people and you're finding a way of talking to them in a way that's that suits them. So kind of not big intimidating group situations if that doesn't work for people, one-on-ones, or if that's too intimidating, do the group thing. Kind of just figure out what works for people and then listen to their stories. And when you hear their stories, that's when you learn about the outcomes and the goals that they've got, what change they want to see, or even better, what change they're already seeing, and how a certain activity might lead to the positive change that they want to see happen. So the Whānau Ora team have done some really interesting things in that space. Joe touched on it early on, talking about with young people, the way that they felt most comfortable telling their stories was through videos and with Snapchat filters and things. So, hey, whatever works for the people that you're trying to listen to the stories from.
Do you have anything to add with?
Yeah, for sure. So Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, our sole purpose at our organisation is to service the aspirations of our whānau. So really the secret to everything lays within them. So if we do not acknowledge, if we don't acknowledge their aspirations, we're not really doing what we need to do. And Brad and Awirangi spoke about it earlier. We are the vehicle for their aspiration. If we want their aspiration to be realised, we need to ensure that they're consistently at the table giving us feedback, and that's with everything that we do. And the very moment that we stop doing it, you can guarantee that there'll be a nanny in our office going, hey. So yeah, they keep us on track. They really determine what it is for Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei and what we do.
Awesome. Right, I've got another question here from Anna from Comet. How do you negotiate defining positive outcomes specifically for funders while not homogenising or prescribing criteria for success for whānau? Ooh. Who'd like to put their hand up for a... Thanks, Anna.
Yeah, good question. And I think what we're seeing is lots of those funders, including government, have their frameworks, and they're normally pretty high level frameworks. So when it works well, we're seeing community organisations define their own story of change, their theory of change, of how what they're doing is leading to that positive goal in the funders framework. That's quite a late stage goal. So they're kind of saying, okay, we see you're interested in employment goals or reduce poverty, or like quite a big, audacious, high level goal, but you're not going to prescribe to us how we're going to get there. We're going to define what the short, medium, and sometimes even long-term outcomes might be on the way to that goal. And by doing that, the funder is encouraging innovation and encouraging you to learn throughout the journey that actually that short-term outcome didn't happen, but we saw some other interesting things happen, and we can pivot and learn and innovate as we go to get to that end goal.
Did you want to add something to that, Brad? Or no?
Not much. Yeah, no, it's exactly what I was about to say, really. So that's,
go.
I mean, that's the difficulty, is balancing up sort of government's expectations to what whānau are wanting and needing and what their aspirations are. And so that's what our model is exactly what Clemi just articulated there. It's understanding what they want and then allowing our partners and communities to design a program that's fit for purpose for them. And what it means is that our whānau, our families and our communities are more accountable, and they own that change for themselves as well, because they've got that buy-in. They've actually designed the program with them, and they've designed the measures of success, not a Whānau Ora Commissioning Agency measure of success, or not a government indicator of success. It's actually a whānau indicator of success. So it's about that as well. Yeah.
Wow. Yes. Okay. Well, look, we can. There's just so many areas that we can carry on discussing, but we're running out of time here. But do you know what? I think I'm sitting here thinking, you guys, I'm so pleased that we've got you on the panel, because like just so aligns with the social value principles of what Social Value Aotearoa and the network actually really seeks to help be part of that global community and actually really drive that conversation. I think there's some really interesting work in New Zealand that actually people globally are looking to. So I really thank you each for coming to the table and sharing your lens through procurement, through corporate social responsibility, through ground up organisations, through commissioning. It's been really exciting. I think there's so much more to this conversation, and I'm sorry that we didn't get to all the questions from the audience there, but if they're still in the chat there, we will seek to find any answers of the ones that we missed. Thank you again. We've got a little gift for you that we'll give you when we finish, but we really appreciate your time. This is probably just the procurement to or the start actually of the week of lots of chats from our members around what impact means to them and through the lens of the wellbeing. So I think are we putting into the chat channel the actual schedule of events. And how you can register. They're free events, and it's really just more about what's started to happen at this table here is around aligning language, looking for common threads where you could actually have mutual opportunities, and just to actually be excited that through wherever you're starting on your impact journey and whatever it means to you is actually really beginning to start on that journey and listen to how other people are moving forward. So I thank you so much for your time. I thank you to all the audience for actually tuning in to listen to us. I thank you for our visual illustrator there. Megan, you've been doing a great job drawing up, and with the harvesters, I believe is a new word I've learnt today around sharing what the panel has to say. So that will be available for us all as an ongoing resource to reflect. Don't forget to tune in to the Social Value Matters conference. Ōrākei, we're looking forward to some more in depth around that. There's some talks around some New Zealand's being represented on adapting tools to local context. Then there's some of our first practitioner, Sneha, who's became our recently first accredited practitioner and SRI trainer. She's doing a series. Fond memories of working with Clemmy and that area there, and a lot about that. We respect where we've got the information from and how it's actually with, not to. So thank you very much for joining. We've really appreciated the time. Thanks, guys, and enjoy the week. Thank you very much.